Okay, now that you know a lot more about how to answer the interview questions, let's talk about how we navigate the different types and forms an interview can take. We're going to look at a case study together. We're going to talk about the forms and types of interviews, and I'm going to finish this lesson off with final do's and don'ts for any interview process. So let's play a quick review game for a second. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think whether this is a fact, it's true, or a fiction, it's false. The first question is, the combination format for your resume highlights your relevant skills and experience. Is this true, fact, or is it false, fiction? This is a fact. Remember that the combination format is the best format to highlight all of your relevant skills, your hard and soft skills, as well as any work experience that you have. You need to have 3 references ready for the interview, and you should bring them with you to the interview. Is that a fact or is that fiction? That is a fact. You should always have at least 3 references ready to provide at any stage in the interview process. Your cover letter is the same as your resume, just in a letter format. Is that true? Is that a fact? Or is it false? Is it fiction? That is fiction. Remember that your cover letter is not the same as your resume. It is an opportunity, however, to expand upon an idea that's embedded somewhere in your resume to tell them more about your story. And remember, they have to see the connection between the job and you right in that covered letter. All right, how about a few more? You need to do a significant amount of preparation or homework before going into a job interview. That is a fact. As we covered just previously, you need to make sure that you're prepared before you go into an interview, because a lot of those how do you fit questions are going to be based on your homework. Remember that you're going to want to refer to the job posting when you're talking about strengths and weaknesses, about short-term and long-term goals, and about how you see yourself fitting into the organization. Networking is something you do every day and it can help you get a job. Is this a fact or fiction? Well, of course, this is a fact. If you've learned anything this semester, it's how important networking is, both online and face-to-face through things like LinkedIn. When introducing yourself at the interview, you should tell a long story about who you are, what you're looking to do, and what you want out of the job. Is that a fact or is that fiction? That is definitely fiction. Remember, that first question, tell me a little bit about yourself, is all about your elevator speech. It should be brief and to the point and just touch upon who you are, what you're doing and what you want to do, and what makes you different. And then stop talking and wait for the first interview question. All right, a few more. The STAR model is used to describe your previous employment on your resume. Is that a fact or fiction? That is fiction. We just covered the STAR model. Remember, that's the situation, task, action, and result. It's a model that we use for answering interview questions. STAR stories are called proof stories, but you can make up the details to get the job. That also is fiction. Remember that STAR stories are in fact true stories, and they don't have to be work stories. They can be stories about teams that you've played on, about things within your personal life. They are proof, though, that you have skills in a variety of different areas, so you don't need to make up any details in a STAR story. Stick to the truth. Writing a resume and cover letter and preparing for an interview is easy work. Is that a fact or is that fiction? That is in fact fiction. If you remember way back a few weeks ago, I told you that all of this work is hard work. So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, take a deep breath. You'll get through this. Remember, this course is all about you. We want to make sure you have the best resume, the best cover letter, and that you are prepared for any interview that comes your way. And that's hard work. Before we get started, think for a second, what type of job interviews have you had? For instance, when you've gone for a job interview, has it been face-to-face with one person? Has it been over something like Skype or Zoom? Have you had to meet with a panel or group of people? Or have your interviews all been over the phone? We're going to be talking about these different types and forms of interviews together in this portion of the lesson. And I want to get you started. We're going to look at a case study for my friend Jody. So here's the case that I want you to think about as we walk through this next portion of the lesson. Jody's been applying for jobs and is thrilled when she gets a phone call from a human resources representative from a recent application that she submitted. Jody is asked a few questions about her resume and cover letter on the phone, and she feels confident that she's answered all the questions really well. At the end of the call, the HR rep asks her if she can come in for a meeting. Wow, Jody thinks, they must be calling me in to offer me the job after just that quick call because she said they wanted to meet with me. When Jody tells the story to her friend that works in recruiting, that's me, she starts to get a bit nervous. Her friend tells her she must have done well during the telephone screening interview, but now she has to get ready for the selection interview. Keep Jody in mind as we talk about the difference here between screening versus selection. The two different types of interviews that we're going to cover are the screening interview and the selection interview. And I'm going to give you some tips on how you navigate successfully each of these types of interviews. I'm also going to dive into the different forms an interview can take. For instance, you may have had telephone interviews in the past. You may have had a very highly structured interview, or maybe one that felt very unstructured or loose. You may have had a panel interview where you've been interviewed by 3 to 5 people, or even perhaps a group interview. They're becoming much more popular today. And even a line of questioning that's called the stress interview. Again, for each of these, I'm going to provide some tips on how you navigate successfully the different types and the different forms an interview can take. First, let's talk about the screening interview. The screening interview allows a company to narrow down the number of candidates for a position. So let's say they've narrowed down the list from 300 candidates to 50 candidates who meet the criteria. So they like your cover letter, they feel that there's a good match between you, your cover letter, and the resume, and they want to just narrow this list of 50 down to 12 to interview. A screening interview is typically done by telephone, or sometimes a very quick face-to-face meeting. These are also typically conducted by an HR person. The thing with a screening interview, the best approach is for you to follow their lead. Be direct and to the point when answering questions. It is an opportunity for you to sell yourself in a very short period of time. You also know typically that it's a screening interview by the amount of time it takes. These are short, 5 to 10 minutes in length at the most. Again, the idea here is they're just wanting to confirm a lot of your information, to hear you talk a little bit, and to see whether you show some enthusiasm for the company. So make sure you do so. That's very different than the selection interview. A selection interview can be conducted by a variety of different people. Typically, the department manager or the supervisor that you would be reporting to is involved, as well as an HR person or people, and this group of people may be making the ultimate decision of whether to hire you or not. Sometimes even coworkers are involved. In a selection interview process, sometimes selection interviews take place over multiple interviews. They're trying to determine from your education and your past experience and your attitude whether you are the right fit for them. They want to make sure that you are a sure thing. It is very expensive to hire and train people, so they don't want to make a mistake. The best approach through every selection interview is to show interest and enthusiasm in the job. Make sure you've done your homework on both the position and the company. Relate your experience to the open position and make sure you demonstrate your abilities at every question by using your STAR stories. Make sure you provide proof of all of your education, experience, and skills through your STAR stories. Okay, so let's talk about the different forms or formats that an interview can take. If we understand that the screening process is the whole format of screening versus selection, we can also encounter different forms or formats for each type of interview. So let's walk through the telephone, structured or unstructured, panel group, and finally the stress. First of all, the telephone interview. This is typically used as a first contact with a candidate, although depending on where you're located, this can also encompass part of the selection process too. And when we're talking about phone, I want to make sure I'm talking about not just telephone where they can't see you, but also something like a Zoom or a Skype call where they can see you. They want to confirm your qualifications and give you additional details about the job. Of course, you need to pass this test to get further on in the selection process. The best thing about these interviews is you have a bit of an advantage. You can have your resume in front of you. You can make sure that you're taking notes and write down any questions you have along the way. The biggest tip I can give you about these types of interviews is to avoid yes/no answers. Continue to add information to sell yourself. Let me give you an example. Let's say I phone you and I have your resume in front of me and I ask you about questions like, so I see that you've been to Durham College, and you respond, yes. And then I give you another question, and I see that you've taken the Supply Chain and Operations Management Diploma program, and you respond, yes. Well, I might try one more time to ask one more question, but if all I'm getting are yes/no answers, I might just move on to the next candidate. So here's a better way to respond to these. When I ask you, so I see that you went to Durham College, you could respond in the affirmative, yes, I did, and continue to add something like, can I give you more information about that? No, I'm fine, I might say. And I see that you completed the Supply Chain and Operations Management Diploma program. Yes, you could answer. Can I tell you a little bit more about some of the courses that I took? Again, you want to continue to provide the affirmative yes or no if it's negative, but then prompt them with, can I provide you more information? If they need it, they'll say, yes, please continue talking. Or no, that's good. That's all I needed at this point in time. So make sure you avoid the yes, no answers and make sure you're selling yourself. Smile on your face, positive attitude. Okay, let's talk about something called the structured interview. Any large company that you're going to be applying for or government agency is going to run what's called a very structured interview. You're going to feel this from start to finish, that it feels very by the book. It feels very highly organized from start to finish. Typically, the interviewer or interviewers have a checklist or a script of questions. Those scripts of questions are typically a point system where they're going to ask you a question and score your responses. Here's the thing. We need you to get the highest score possible because the highest score wins. A structured interview can be conducted in a variety of ways. It's telephone, one-on-one, group, or panel. The big thing with structured interview is you have to provide proof of your skills to get the highest score. And how do you do that? Ding, 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 the STAR model. They want to hear proof that you've been able to provide in the past demonstrated ability to manage through a variety of different situations. Another form that you may encounter is something called the unstructured interview. The exact opposite of the structured interview, but good interviewers like to mix it up sometimes. With this, it might feel open and relaxed. You might feel more of these what I would call broad questions. Things like, So tell me more about your experience, or tell me more about your past employment. You're definitely encouraged to talk and share more of your past experiences. And you're allowed to bring more of your unique personality and demonstrate how you are the best person for the job. Be careful. Doesn't mean just because it feels unstructured, it doesn't mean that you're not being interviewed. And again, a good structured interview also has some components of the unstructured. And they're going to compare how you did, for instance, in the structured portion versus an unstructured portion. In my past experience, we use this methodology a lot. We might bring you in for a very structured panel interview. We're going to get to the panel in just a second. But then let's say you did well on the panel interview. We might then put you in a separate room and have you just meet with some coworkers, for instance. And as you chat with those coworkers about the work environment and the job, you might suddenly feel very relaxed and feel like you're really not being interviewed. Be mindful that you are always being interviewed as part of the interview process. No one that you meet along the way is just met by coincidence or chance. Everyone you're talking to is part of the interview process and decision making. So make sure that you're still continuing to stick to your star stories and that you're professional at all times. Okay, the panel interview. This is typically very common again with larger organizations, although I would say even small companies like to use the panel interview. It provides them a distinct advantage in that they have between 2 and 6 people who may ask you questions, may take notes, and they get to hear your answers all at the same time. The great thing is, the reason it's an advantage for them is then they can compare candidates afterwards. And again, they may have a scoring system or point system that they'll use to evaluate at the end. One of the big challenges I find with panel interviews is to keep eye contact with everyone throughout the interview. Make sure you don't disregard anyone who does not ask you any questions as part of this process. A tip I would say here for you, when answering questions as part of a panel, start by answering the question by looking the person in the eyes who asked you the question. Then as you're continuing to answer, look at everyone else as you're talking and remember to return your gaze to the person who posed the question before you finish talking. That way you'll make sure that you're acknowledging everyone who's sitting at the table with you and no one is left out of the conversation. I call this a less common interview form, although it is definitely gaining in popularity. It's something called the group interview, and you may have even encountered this in your past interview experience. This is where there's 2 or maybe many more candidates being interviewed all at the same time. This is something that started with big box companies like Walmart and Home Depot and IKEA, but certainly it's graduated to businesses. Again, as a business, I have a lot of advantages in doing this. It's a very quick way to narrow down my pool of candidates by having you all in the room with your competition and maybe asking you to solve something as a group or asking you questions and having each person respond in turn. The tip I'm going to give you about group interviews is they're looking for team players. They look to see whether you can stand out in the crowd against your competition. But it doesn't mean that you have to jump all over everybody else and take over the situation. Just be your true self here, but make sure you're communicating what you're thinking as you go through the group interview process. So for instance, if you have to solve a case study as a team, perhaps you're not the most extroverted person. That's okay. But don't let someone else just take over the entire situation. Make sure you speak up enough to at least let them know that you've thought through the situation and that you have some of your own ideas. Again, you want to be yourself in the group interview, but don't go completely silent. If you go completely silent, you'll lose out on the opportunity for the job as well, because they need someone who's at least able to speak up and communicate their ideas. Okay, and now something called the stress interview. This typically is not a whole interview because believe me, all interviews are stressful. But this is sometimes during an interview, you're asked a relatively obscure question. Like that you probably have heard the old phrase of, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be? Well, we don't ask those types of silly questions anymore. But you might be asked a question that you simply don't know the answer to, and you're not even really sure how it fits into the train and logic that you've been hearing so far. The idea behind a stress interview question is to see how you react to an unusual situation. Because guess what? You're going to face these in the workplace. You may face unexpected challenges, and you may have seen this in your previous work experience where you have no idea how to respond to this strange thing that's happened, and there's no one you can ask for help. The idea behind this relatively obscure question is to simply see how do you respond when you're put under a great deal of stress and you don't understand the question or how to navigate to an answer. My advice for you here, talk about the first thing that comes to mind. It's even okay to laugh a little bit and say, wow, I really wasn't expecting that kind of question. They want to see, can you react and sort of roll with the punches, as we say, in terms of responding to things that are uncertain. So do the best you can and then let it go. Don't continue coming back to that question to see if you can get to the right answer. Once you've answered it, move on. Okay, so now that we've covered the different forms and formats that an interview can take, let's return to our case study of Jody. Remember, when Jody told her friend that she worked in HR, she started to get a little bit nervous because her friend told her she must have done well during the telephone screening interview, but now she had to get ready for the selection interview. So Jody thought she was done after that quick phone call, but so how can my friend Jody find out what type of interview she'll be going to and what difference does it make? Well, here's the thing. You should try and find out what kind of interview you're going to be facing so that you can prepare as much as possible. With a lot of advanced preparation, the most important thing that will happen is that you're going to increase your confidence going into the interview. So how can you find out? Well, ask. It's no secret how companies do their interview processes. As a matter of fact, they may be impressed that you're asking them what kind of interview you're going into. So for instance, you could say to them, am I preparing for a panel interview because I want to make sure I have the right number of copies of my resume available to each person who's part of the panel? Sure, they would say. Let's say then they would tell you you're going to be seeing 5 people as part of the panel interview. Fantastic. Now you know exactly what you're walking into. Or if they say, actually, it's a group interview, they'll let you know this is the kind of thing that you're going to be doing as part of a group. Again, it's not a company secret. Sometimes they even put information on their website, although that's a bit more rare. But certainly they will give you the information that you need to prepare in advance. They're not trying to trip you up. But so often people do not ask the question. I know in my own experience when I did many hundreds of interviews, I could always tell the people who had asked in advance what type of interview they were coming into. They just came in looking more prepared and more relaxed than those people who came wide-eyed through the door and suddenly saw 5 of us sitting across a table. You want to make sure that you're feeling confident going into the interview and that there are no surprises that you're going to encounter. If you're prepared with your star stories and you kind of know what you're walking into in terms of the format of interview, you're going to feel a lot better and feel like a confident candidate ready to take on the world. Some final do's and don'ts. Now, I know I'm not your mom, but we've been talking a lot about interviews, and I do have some final do's and don'ts that might sound a little motherly. Some final do's. Make sure you research the position and the company. Remember, this is critical. You may have applied for this job weeks or even months ago. Go back to the job posting, make sure you're very familiar with all the skills they're looking for, and make sure you've done your homework on the company. What are they doing today? What do they want to do in the future? This is going to help you answer a lot of questions. Make sure you bring your resume, multiple copies, as well as your references. You know an interview is going very well if at the end of the interview they ask for you to leave your references. Unfortunately, the opposite is also true. You know an interview has not gone well if at the end you offer your references and they say, no, thank you. This is where the motherly part comes in. Make sure you eat a good breakfast and be prepared for a long day. I know that might sound a bit silly, but actually having breakfast and being prepared is going to help you get through the interview process. You might be there for many hours depending on travel time and returning back home again, and you don't want to be starving halfway through the interview. I'll give you another quick tip here. If you can, eat a banana for breakfast. The potassium in bananas actually helps calm your nerves. So potassium is good for people who want to feel confident and less nervous. The other thing is get a good night's sleep, and along with that, be early for the interview. Well, you might say, if this is the job of my dreams, I might have a hard time getting a good night's sleep, but here's where the being early comes in. If you can, go and scout the location well in advance, let's say 2 or 3 days in advance, and know exactly how long it's going to take for you to get there. That's going to help you get a good night's sleep the night before. If you know, for instance, what GO train you have to take or what time you have to get up to get there, that's going to help you sleep better. You're not going to be worried about missing a train or wondering, will it take me an hour? Will it take me 45 minutes to get there? And then be early for sure. Never ever be late for a job interview. Make sure you dress both professionally and comfortably. Don't wear something that makes you feel uncomfortable because it'll come across in the way you sit, the way you walk, and in your confidence level. Make sure you smile. It is the universal symbol for I am very happy to be here. Remember, everyone is part of the interview process, from the person that greets you at the door to the person that walks you out at the end of the day. Be polite to everyone at all times. And make sure that you have a firm handshake. If you're meeting face to face, a firm grip, but don't crush their hands. Make sure you make good eye contact while you're shaking their hands as well. There might be some others that I've missed here, but I think you get the general gist of my interview do's. Let's talk about some interview. Don't ever go in without doing any research. It's a surefire way to lose the job. Don't forget to bring a copy of your resume or multiple copies. So don't assume that they've got them. Sometimes when you're put on an interview panel, you may not have multiple copies of the resume available. So make sure you as the candidate are the one that's prepared and has multiple copies. Don't ever forget to smile and use all your manners. Don't ever use your phone. And here's another tip with the phones. When you're seeing someone face to face for an interview, turn it right off. Don't put it on vibrate or just on silent. Make sure it's right off so that you're not interrupted or don't have a chance of being interrupted and it doesn't throw you off your game. Don't ever show up late. They may not even allow you to come in for the interview. Don't dress inappropriately. My mother used to say if you wear something that someone can see up, down, or through, it is inappropriate. Keep that in mind for the interview. Or wearing anything distracting. Things distracting can be things like cologne that's really, really strong, perfume, or jewelry that's really jangly or makes a lot of noise. Think about anything that's going to take away from your message is distracting and leave it at home. Don't ever swear. Don't ever chew gum or eat or dress uncomfortably. Again, you want to feel comfortable and confident. Don't interrupt the speaker or speakers. They may tell you the same story multiple times. For instance, the HR person may describe the job to you and what it's all about and a little bit about the company. And then you may move on to a second interview where, guess what? They tell you a little bit about the job and a little bit about the company. By the third interview, you might feel like you want to interrupt them and say, I've got all that information, I'm good, but don't. Make sure you just sit and listen politely, nod your head, They may provide some additional details that you haven't heard before. I think I've got most of them here. There may be a few others that you may be able to think of as well. But overall, my interview do's and don'ts should get you set up for success.